On today's show, here's what the 2023 NBA draft means for the Cavs, despite the fact that they have one pick. Let's dive in.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. I am Chris Manning, covering the Cavs and the NBA for outlets like SB Nation, Cleveland Magazine, the Just Basketball Show, and more. That man over there is Evan Dammarrell, the founder of independent site Down Euclid, which is covering the entire Cleveland sports scene. Jake Stevens, as always, is producing. I want to thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, segment 1, we're going to look at how to look at the draft through a Cavs lens. Segment 2, we're going to react to the draft lottery, which saw the San Antonio Spurs get the number 1 pick, and they're going to get Wemby. And segment 3, reflecting on the power of a draft lottery, because this is 20 years since the Cleveland Cavaliers won the lottery and got a certain kid from Akron, Ohio. LeBron James, ever heard of him? Okay. Evan, here, this is what I tend to think about the 2023 NBA draft of the Cleveland Cavaliers. They have a second-round pick. This draft, to me, is just, can you get someone you can develop, turn into a two-way deal, whatever it is? I think this draft to me is about, okay, can you take your second round pick and take a swing at a position of need? Is there a toolsy wing you can develop at that spot? Is there, another 3-4 type you like where you have to develop a shot and try that route? That's a thing they like to do. I think this draft is all about trying to just find someone you really believe you can develop. And, maybe we see a scenario where they do what they did to get Kevin Porter Jr., spend some money, buy a pick, do something like that if there's someone they really like. But I think whatever it is, if they keep the pick, whatever, let's get someone in the building, not a draft and stash, not just a 2 centers in the second round like last year. I think if you're the Cavs, go get someone you feel like you can really develop and try to turn into something.
I agree with that sentiment. I wonder, there's multiple schools of thought. So for those wondering, Cleveland's picking via Golden State in the second round. It's like the mid-second round pick. It's like 45th or 46th overall. So the Cavs could get a player that could develop into something. But I agree with the sentiment that, especially with the luxury of now having 3 two-way spots available to you, like you look at a guy and say, okay, we don't need to look at like Khalifa Diop or Luke Travers, who Kobe Altman told me neither of which are coming over this season for Cleveland. And you look at a guy who could maybe not make an immediate impact, but this is something Chris and I have just kind of banged our fists on our desk about as we record this show over 1 million times at this point, that Cleveland needs to like develop like those quality 3rd, 4th mans at certain positions. I think wing is the most obvious one, and there could be guys there. Maybe you look at backup point guards as well to like maybe be that heir apparent to what you hoped Ricky Rubio was, just to back up Darius Garland long term on a cheaper contract. But there are options and avenues and paths for the Cavs to pursue. It's just like you said, they could buy a 1st round pick in the late end of the 1st, but we'll see how it goes. Cleveland had way more ammunition before they acquired Donovan Mitchell, but this is the reality of the situation now. Like the Cavs just don't have the draft capital to really be playing this game, nor should they at this point, because they're looking to contend now versus maybe prioritize player development with however many picks they may have had if they didn't trade for Donovan Mitchell last summer.
I'm curious to see just like also, what if they do use that pick on someone, like actually what they use it on. In thinking about last year's draft, let's use that as a point of context. So you start off with the 4 picks before the Mitchell trade. So you take Ochai Agbaji, you take a wing at 14. Makes a ton of sense. Certainly, I think arguments you could have gone other ways, but like the logic of picking Agbaji makes sense. You take Isaiah Mobley, which just seemed like, hey, like we like the Mobleys. Let's like get this guy, and we kind of told him we were going to draft him. It seems like okay. Then you take Khalifa Diop, who's another center, at a position where you have Jared Allen and you have Isaiah Mobley, and you think, and Evan Mobley obviously is going to play some center. That one to me still, I'm kind of curious, like what the logic was there to some degree. Okay. Maybe that's just the highest guy on your board. It's a long-term play. You don't ever plan on him coming over. It's just like we need to use the pick and blah, blah, blah. Okay, whatever. And then you take Luke Travers, who's not going to come over this year. But Evan, in a bit of news, not only a couple weeks ago it was announced he's going to play for Melbourne United. That is, and it is pronounced Melbourne. It is not Melbourne, you silly Americans. It is Melbourne.
You imperialists, learn other languages and dialects.
Okay. You took it to a place, and that's you, and I respect that. Did you see who is going to be on his team next year? Did you see the news of who's going to be playing? This should be like a layup if you think about Australia and the Cavs.
Is it Matthew Dellavedova?
That is correct. Delhi has signed to Melbourne United.
Really?
Yeah, he's going back to Australia to play at home, and you're gonna have Luke Travers and Matthew Dellavedova on this team. That is I don't think that means a ton, whatever, but it's just like funny that like the universe
that's
has
interesting.
put them in the same place for whatever reason.
Yeah,
and that's kind of cool.
Cool is a good way to put it. Interesting because Dellavedova did leave the NBA and, his second stint with the Cavs to sign with Melbourne United for the 21-22 NBL season. And then he joined Mike Brown and the Kings for the last season. And that's kind of interesting because Dellavedova was always one of Mike Brown's dudes, whether it's when Brown was the coach for that 1 year before David Blatt and LeBron and such. But it's just interesting to see how life works. And Luke Travers did mention like he doesn't have like a super big relationship with Dellavedova, but like after he was drafted by Cleveland, it kind of connected the bridge between the two. So maybe this is just a continuation of that. Maybe Kobe Altman's playing 4D chess, as some folks like to say as well, just to say like, all right, Delly, we need you to go out there and convince Luke to keep looking like Billy from Stranger Things and maybe become more of an NBA level wing. Yeah,
I don't think that's
a joke.
Going there,
that's an interesting footnote. Okay, there could have been several ways. It could have been Andrew Bogut, who played like all of 6 seconds for the Cavs.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna go there. Andrew Bogut also hasn't played professional basketball in like several years. It's one of the he's just like us. He hosts a podcast now, so good for him. But that draft to me is just interesting because it's like you took 2 wings and you took 2 bigs. And like it's a lot of like very long-term plays that like, I don't know what the hit rate on those guys are going to be. Like I don't know if Luke Travers is ever going to figure it out. I don't know if Diop's ever going to figure it out. I don't know. We don't know how good Isaiah Mobley is going to be, right? Like that's how this will be with this year. But I'm curious to see like what positional route they go. To me, if you're going to do this, I'm going to advocate this 10 times out of 10. Just take a swing on the wing. Just always take the swing on. Like just do it. Like what's if you miss, I would rather miss on a guy that's like 6'8" and maybe could shoot some threes for you and that than like another center. Just take the wing.
I agree with you. And I participated in like a community mock draft from NBA Twitter yesterday, actually. And I ended up securing, trying to pull up his actual, not Grady Dick, excuse me. I was about to say him. Jalen Wilson from Kansas. He somehow fell. He's like ranked 31st overall in Tankathon's mock right now, which would be the first second round pick for Detroit. He's a 6'8" small forward, power forward, kind of that tweener. He has a projected 3-point range. He rebounds like crazy. He plays hard on defense. He doesn't foul, which is another like key attribute. And like, yeah, that makes sense for the Cavs saying like we need physicality next to Jared Allen and Evan Mobley, especially like in terms of crashing the glass, or maybe a guy that just like isn't afraid to bang, whether down low or on the perimeter. But like if you just like look at Tankathon alone, there's several wings, whether they're freshmen or even seniors. If the Cavs want to take a stab at them, like Keontae Johnson from Kansas State could be interesting. Like Jordan Walsh from Arkansas could be interesting as well. Like I've done some basic like treading the waters, and I'm gonna start picking the brains of like draft folks who've been like sinking their teeth into these guys all season long. But there could be wing like players that the Cavs could take a stab at, and I agree with you. That's the luxury of the two-way deal. That's the luxury of the G League. And I think if you're a team like Cleveland and you don't trade the second round pick, which is 49th overall, just to correct the record, you could take a swing and develop it, or it just doesn't work out. That's fine, because it's not like you're spending legitimate money, or like, yeah, it's capital, but it's not like serious capital. Like that's a late mid second round pick if you're Cleveland.
Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Gametime. This is where you can buy tickets to your favorite events, and it doesn't have to be stressful. It's the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you with killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee. You can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. Flash deals and last-minute tickets are on there, easy to find and buy tickets for every event in your area, and you can get images of your seat right in the app. It is the place for last-minute deals. Forget planning months in advance. Gametime has deals on tickets right up until the day of the event. Like when I go to New York this summer, I'm going to be in town for Liberty Aces at Barclays. I will be using Gametime to get the best deal possible before I go see that with some of my New York friends. The Gametime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section in a row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Snag the tickets without the stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price. That's guaranteed. Thanks for making Locked On Cavs your first team every day. Everydayers will be back tomorrow with more here on Locked On Cavs, and we're going to get a little nerdy with some numbers. I'm going to do a solo show, and I'm going to dive specifically into some of what the numbers say about the Cavs guard play last season and some of the noise and stuff in there. Evan, here's the draft order. This ended up pretty chalk for the most part. It ended up pretty to the point. So you get the Spurs 1, the Hornets 2, the Trailblazers 3, the Rockets 4, the Pistons 5, they fall out of the top. The Magic 6, the Pacers 7, Wizards 8, Jazz 9, Mavs 10, Magic 11, that's the pick from the Bulls. The Thunder 12, 13 Raptors, and the 14 David Griffin's New Orleans Pelicans. What do you think about Wemby to San Antonio?
I like the fit. For those who maybe don't remember, I am predominantly French, so like Victor Wembanyama is a player I've been watching for quite a bit now, and I think just him going to San Antonio is fun. I was texting front of the program Joe Kohler about this prior to recording as well. Just like Popovich is 74. He is kind of in the Spurs are clearly in the midst of like a rebuild after sending DeJounte Murray to Atlanta, and they're trying to find the next direction. And I think obviously the best generational prospect since LeBron James 20 years ago is certainly a great place to be in if you're the Spurs. And there's a lot of interesting pivots that San Antonio can make from this point onwards too. Like maybe they offload some other players and just kind of really lean into the rebuild. But I like the fit. I just think whoever gets Wemby is going to be happy. You have to feel and empathize with Blazers fans quite a bit because they were literally one digit off, I believe, from getting the first overall pick. And also Hornets fans, you have to show a little empathy with as well, just because the Hornets have never had the first overall pick, and they've gotten close quite a few times. And LaMelo to Wemby would have been a fun combo, but the Hornets have so many more questions than they do answers right now. But it makes sense. Like the draft lottery found a pretty fun outcome. It's not like a dramatic leap where you're seeing like a team like New Orleans or Toronto or even Dallas jump to first overall to get Wemby. So him going to San Antonio is fun, and it should just, again, nothing's rigged in my eyes, but like at least it gives credence to Adam Silver's like hope for parity across the league, because San Antonio is now getting a superstar. Ditto for Charlotte, depending on what they do, and then the Pistons and Rockets as well.
Yeah, look, I like this landing spot. This is one of the, if I was going to pick any two teams to get Wemby that I was rooting for the Blazers, and I was rooting for the Spurs.
Really?
Oh yeah. So like Portland, go ahead. I have an affinity for Portland. I have an affinity for that franchise. I just also think it was a chaos answer. That was like, hey, like they have Dame. We don't actually. This somebody actually asks out. Does this like what do they do at that pick? Like there's just all these things that would have unlocked. In the Spurs, it's like that just feels like a place where like I think Wemby is going to succeed anywhere. But history tells us that like that organization is going to take really good care of Wemby and be successful. And it's also cool that you have the lineage of Tony Parker played there. Boris Diaw played there. Like you have the French connection of Wemby
Well,
in that franchise. There's something cool about that.
not even that. Like Tim Duncan, arguably the greatest power forward of all time.
Yeah.
Even David Robinson, one of the greatest centers of all time, played there too. Like there's a lot of lineage and history, and Popovich, interestingly enough, has seen all of it for San Antonio. So like, if you want a prospect to succeed at the highest level, I think sending them, especially one that's like, there's that international touch too. Like I was sharing with my fiance prior to recording. She's like, why did the Spurs get? I'm like, well, it's kind of cool just because the Spurs are a team that draft intelligently, but like also they find international prospects and maximize them, whether it's Manu, Tony Parker, technically Tim Duncan as well. Like it's a fun match. And I think I'm so excited to watch him play. I was hoping he would end up with like Detroit or even Indiana, just because I want to watch more of Wemby playing the Cavs, but unfortunately, just as a selfish basketball fan, I can watch him play the Cavs twice a year just from the lens of this show. Like I'll be tuning in to Spurs games as often as I can, but instead of having 2 bites of the apple or 4 bites of the apple against Indiana or Detroit, Cleveland only gets 2.
So let me ask you. Asked me this yesterday. I'm gonna put you on the spot and ask you now. How many? If the Spurs called you and said, "What's your offer for Wemby, Kobe Altman?" What would you actually offer for Wemby?
So the problem is you have like no first round pick swaps because of the Donovan Mitchell trade. But
I'm just saying
Evan Mobley is the beginning of this conversation. Like I feel that strongly about Wemby, and if you're the Spurs, you try to milk Cleveland for every single asset you have, and then if you're the Cavs, you have to figure how comfortable am I selling the farm for a 7'5" French everything man that moves like a guard, but is only 19 years old. Like, do we want to commit our entire franchise to him? And that's what I was kind of stressing in the first segment. Is like Cleveland's in this interesting spot where like they don't need to focus on player development just because of how they're constructed, but the package would have to start with Mobley, and you may have to include Darius Garland to really move it. Like that's how strongly I feel about Wemby.
I mean, I think you probably would, just because it's like, this is like, it's year one of a contract. He's not getting paid anything at this point. Like he's making like his contract's going to be a bargain for the next half decade. He is younger, and like the way people talk about him, it's like Mobley was a great prospect. Some people had him number 1 in that draft. Darius Garland was the 5th overall pick. Like Donovan Mitchell's like a really good player. If you get into these conversations, like it gets to this point where it's like, people are saying this is the greatest prospect like since LeBron, and then you have like the little things like maybe the best ever, and it's like I think that's a little. Yeah, but it's like this is how he's being talked about, and it's like that's a different level than like anyone that pretty much any other team has. Like I bet you the list of trades that players the Spurs would actually give up this pick for is like very 3 slim. Players long. It's like 3 it's like, and even then it's like I could totally understand if you're like, you know what, like you trade for superstar X. This is like becomes like a really complicated thing for us. It'd be like a fascinating like piece of someone that could get access to like a bunch of different GMs, decision makers, talk to them off the record and be like, okay, like what is actually like, what could the Spurs cash this in for? They won't do that, but what could they cash it in for if they wanted to?
It's a fascinating thought exercise because it's a double-edged sword based on whoever you're acquiring, because we all know a boat's a boat, but a box or the mystery box could be anything, and Wembanyama is a bit of that mystery box. But like, folks, if you're not sold on him, go break down some of his footage. He moves like a point guard, but he is just absolute.
Read our friend Raphael Barlow on his Substack NBA Draft Big Board. Go read Raphael; he's the man.
Yeah, that too. And it's an interesting conversation. It's an interesting thought process. But yeah, San Antonio holds on to Wemby, and he hopefully, just trying to hedge my bets here a little bit, like hopefully he becomes the player that everyone expects him to be. And it's interesting because, there's like a similar conversation with Zion several years ago too, but like there was maybe a little bit, like maybe a shred of doubt of like who could go first overall in that Zion class, even though we all knew it was going to be Zion Williamson at the end of the day. But like Victor Wembanyama, Bill DiFilippo pointed this out on Twitter. Like it's the first time in a while that just like everyone knew right away, like, okay, this is the guy who's going to go first overall. It's not going to be Scoot Henderson. It's not going to be Brandon Miller. It's not going to be either of the Thompson twins. Like it is Wembanyama, and like, congrats San Antonio. You got the best prospect in quite a long time, and the team's also in the top 5. You're going to get a pretty good player, but it's not Victor Wembanyama. So it's interesting to think about and kind of poetic in a sense, just because it is technically 20 years since the Cavs got the first overall pick when they got LeBron, which was probably the last truly like, this is the dude that you could build like your entire franchise around and possibly win multiple championships with.
I mean, I think there's other guys that have been like standards, but it feels like it's truly like a generational thing. We're going to talk about the 20 years with LeBron after this, but also just we're not going to get last year where it's like Paolo like didn't know he was going number 1. That's not happening. Wemby, like Wendy's in Paris. The GOAT Brian Windhorst is in Paris for ESPN being like,
for a 60
so you're going to play
bump.
Look, that Disney money cashes, you know? Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. To play, pick 2 to 5 players, and if they go score more or less than their PrizePicks projections, you win. You can win up to 10 times your money in any entry. There's no competing against other people. It is just you versus those projections available. PrizePicks offers projections on any sport that you watch. This includes the NBA, the NFL, WNBA as that comes up, esports, tennis, MMA, boxing, disc golf, PGA, everything. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It is that easy. They offer safe and fast withdrawals. Currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. Don't forget to enter that promo code Locked On and sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. I want to remind you, by the way, that you can check out NBA games on SiriusXM on the SXM app. You catch hometown broadcasts there. It's a great app. So 20 years ago, the Cleveland Cavaliers win the draft lottery. They get LeBron James.
You can also see, if you watch the replay of it, as friend of the program, Jay Kyleman pointed out, you can watch Jerry West's soul leave his body as the Cavs get the first overall pick.
And this is obviously a pivotal draft, right? Like, you know, you have Darko goes 2, Melo goes 3, Bosh 4, Wade 5, you know, Kirk Heinrichs in that draft, TJ Ford, Michael Petrus. Like, you get Nick Collison, who's drafted by the Supersonics, now representing the Thunder at this draft, which is kind of cool to see. You look at the lottery, the suits are so much, like Jay Billis is younger and his suit's much bigger. It fits differently. Like Antoine Jameson is representing the Warriors at that draft. Like it's like a whole thing. And you just go through, like they're panning everywhere. David Stern is the commissioner, obviously. Like Tarico, who's now at NBC doing football stuff, is like the host of this. The graphics are like extremely old. Like all of this just feels like, oh, right, this was 20 freaking years ago. Like this is the reality of it. But it's like this is where I think this is worth going to. The Cleveland Cavaliers as a franchise were 100% transformed by the fact that they won this lottery. The course of the franchise changed because of one draft lottery. That's how much these things matter.
Yeah, that's not a hot take whatsoever. Like I agree with you 100%. And sure, there's an alternate timeline where maybe Cleveland ends up with the second or third pick and they get Carmelo Anthony or Chris Bosh or Dwayne Wade. Like this
universally, I feel like they would have just been like, hey, we're taking Darko. That would, you don't get LeBron, you just take Darko, and that's the dark timeline. That's such a what if for me. Like, what if the Pistons took D Wade or Chris Bosh or Carmelo and like developed them on the back end and like formed like a legitimate dynasty because LeBron picked them apart a few years later and kind of just gave them the death knell. But yeah, the first overall pick in 2003 completely changed the trajectory for Cleveland, a team that hardly ever gets first round picks in the lottery to begin with. And it's certainly an interesting flashpoint because a lot of different avenues and things could have changed. I had mentioned Jerry West. Like there's a possibility that the Grizzlies do get the first overall pick and they keep their pick and LeBron starts his career in Memphis instead of Cleveland. But it was something poetic about it. We talked about this when COVID first started popping off, when we did a book club on Return of the King. Like just that entire process leading up to the moment of LeBron joining the Cavaliers. Like there was something poetic about the fact that like Gordon Gunn was
not on his way out with the team, but like was getting in the process to sell the team eventually to Dan Gilbert. And like, there's a lot of just formative pieces that were put in place in this moment that led to the Cavs to where they were in 2016 and also where they are now, because let's us not forget that one Mo Williams was picked in the second round, 47th overall by the Jazz, and he eventually ended up with the Cavs and was technically part of that championship team as well. But we're focusing on LeBron, I know. But
yeah,
like,
we're focusing on like you shouted out a second round pick versus the greatest player of all time, and the Cavs who won the lottery just selected with Gordon Gunn representing them at this lottery. Like, this is, what are we doing talking about second round picks? This was moments
before Carlos Boozer also lied to a blind man in Gordon Gunn too. But no,
what are we doing? Killing me.
2016 is the championship was the biggest moment in Cavs franchise history. Clearly, it's their first ever championship. But I would say, just like with recency bias on my side, to pivot this conversation back to LeBron, like them winning the lottery in 2003 was probably the biggest moment, in like the second biggest moment rather, in franchise history.
That would be a fun
laid
episode.
The foundation
That's
for everything.
That I feel like this is a good like August episode for us. Is okay. Let's power rank the 5 biggest episodes or moments in Cavs franchise history. And I think you're. I don't. I'd have to like think. I think the title is one. Clearly. But like, do you delineate like moments? Like, do you delineate the block? Do you delineate like all these other little things, or is it just like
That's
that
fair.
Title win? Does that like? It'd be a fun episode to debate that and kind of draft like all these different moments. I think the biggest thing with this draft lottery is just I really like the draft lottery. I'm like pro the fact that it exists. I'm pro the fact that it's a little random. It's a little chaotic.
Mm-hmm.
I think it really does also, it doesn't guarantee anything.
Yeah.
One of the things about the lessons of the first LeBron era is that like, you can get a guy number one. You can get the greatest prospect that has ever come around, the chosen one, all that stuff. And he can leave you because you don't do enough to support him and you trade a first round pick for Jerry Welsh. This is just like these draft lotteries are step one. The draft is just step one. It's part of the bigger puzzle.
Or
that's I think what makes it so fun.
You watch Andre Iguodala go 9th overall, and you take Luke Jackson with the following pick.
Look,
or even Luol Deng 7th. Like, there's some pretty. We talked about this at length again during the pandemic, but like the Cavs swang and they missed quite often in terms of just drafting talent to surround LeBron the first time around. And I'm like, I'm looking at it more and more like it's fascinating to see like, oh yeah, they definitely missed on that one, just because you do have the power of hindsight when breaking down these drafts too.
Do you have just to end on this? They did shout out. I want to say that ESPN did give a tribute to Nick Gilbert on this broadcast as well. Mm-hmm. It's wild to me how much the draft lottery in the last 20 years is like I think you're right saying maybe the 2003 draft lottery is like one of maybe the second biggest moment in Cavs franchise history. There's definitely an argument for it. It's funny how much of the other big moments that aren't LeBron related in the last 20 years are centered around the draft lottery.
I mean, it's Kyrie Irving, Tristan Thompson, technically, Andrew Wiggins, Anthony Bennett, those two becoming Kevin Love down the pipeline. And shoot, even maybe Cleveland is unable to secure Donovan Mitchell last summer if they didn't make the playoffs rather, because they didn't have, I guess, the luxury of trading Ochai Agbaji after you drafted him. Like there's a lot of, you're right. Like the Cavs history has been largely linked to the success of LeBron James, especially in our lives, but they're kind of in a different territory now just because they're trying to build out of that shadow, which is just an untenable task. But it's interesting because you're right. Like the lottery used to just be a thing. It's like the NFL draft too, where it was just a bunch of executives in the conference room of a Marriott, and they would just call out their picks like in the middle of the day, and then you'd read it. But like I asked my dad, he's like, yeah, you'd read about the draft in the paper like a day or two after the fact to see like my dad was a Bengals fan. He said like you'd see the Bengals draft a couple of days after the fact, but like now, like in the moment right away because either every insider's dropping it or like it's must see TV on ESPN or anything else, and it's fun. It's an exciting moment. I think just because the game of basketball keeps getting better and better, especially on an international level. When you just look at Wemby as a prospect, like there's so much good young talent coming into the league, and I think there is definitely something to be excited about. Sure, disappointment in the moment not picking first. If you're the Cavs, you have so many instances of picking first in the last 20 years, but again, it all built the foundation to where they won the championship in 2016 and also where they are now in acquiring Donovan Mitchell.
Let's end there. This is going to be your Locked On Cavs for Wednesday, May 17th. I'm Chris Manning. That's Evan Dammarrell. Every day, I'll be back tomorrow looking at some numbers that explain the Cavs season in retrospect with some space. Hope you'll tune in for that. Thanks again to Jake Stevens, as always, for his production work, because he's the best.